My name is Clinita Justice, and I'm an engineering program manager for Google Play. And we're honored and excited to welcome director of the movie Belle, Ama Asante. Everybody give her a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.
So welcome to Google, Ama, and thank you so much for your amazing work in bringing this little-known life to the world.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. So let's play the trailer of the film. A group of Googlers got to see it last night during a screening.
Thank you.
So I really enjoyed this film.
I'm glad.
Thank you. And for those that don't know, Dido Elizabeth Belle was discovered from an 18th century painting that was done of her and her cousin. So Ama, how did you learn about this painting and how did it shape your interest in doing this project?
Yeah. So it was a really interesting process for me. 2009, I had come off of the back of my first movie, A Way of Life, which I was lucky enough to win a British Academy Award with. And I had been working, developing, writing other projects. One of them was a Jane Austen adaptation of a yet unadapted piece called Lady Susan. And so I was working with a producer who had a small company which was part of New Line Cinema, and doing all my research, because I find that my research is really my education. That's how I've become educated in any kind of way in life, and was really increasingly becoming obsessed with the woman's position in 18th century England in particular. And so 2009 comes along, and I'm working on 3 different projects, and the next one is also a project which is kind of looking at a mixed race girl living in Berlin during the 1940s war, Second World War. So really, again, looking at the experience of a person of colour in Europe. And the BFI, who are the British Film Institute, very much involved in my work and my career and financing work that I've done previously, had received an idea, a project from a producer, my producer, it turns out, Damien Jones, who had been trying to get a project about Dido's life off of the ground for quite some time. Now, for him, it had started life with a writer at HBO here in America, and they had gone through development. It hadn't quite worked. The project had been dropped. Damien had brought it to England. They had continued with the writer, and for whatever reason, you know, that they had moved on. And so they came to me. You know, the BFI said to Damien, have you sent this postcard to Ama, because she's obsessed with the woman's experience in 18th century England. She's obsessed with people of colour in European history, and she is an irrepressible romantic, and she's just dying to tell a love story. So, you know, have you sent this to her to see what she would make of it? And so Damien eventually sent me this postcard. Now, I'd never seen the portrait before, but what I was lucky enough to have experienced was going to an exhibition in Holland, which is where I live now, which charted the history of black people in European art from the 14th century onwards. Wow. And it was the most fascinating exhibition I've ever been to. And it really looked at us from kind of background character right until we came to front and center and eventually became muses kind of closer to modern day. But what it showed me was that in the 18th century, we were accessories. When I say we, people of colour were accessories. So we were there to express the status of the main Caucasian protagonist in the painting. So we were always painted lower down. We were never looking out, or very rarely looking out at the painter. We were always looking up at the main protagonist with our arm reaching out towards them, which would draw your eye towards them. And so when this painting of, which is known as Belle and Bette, came to me, it came in a context where I could see it was so different. There is Dido, so beautiful and happy with this sparkle in her eye, looking directly out at the painter. She's actually painted slightly higher in the painting. and wow, it's Elizabeth's arm that is reaching out to her, drawing your eye to her. And it was a revelation to me. And what I saw at that point was the opportunity, if I got it right, to tell a story that would combine politics, art and history and race. Yes. And with the sub-themes of love, gender, the woman's place, identity, belonging, you know, all of those, I knew it was going to have to be a big story. So that's where it really started for me. And then it was a process of research and going back to you know, finding out exactly what kind of story I would want to tell, how much of it would have to be drawn of fiction, and how much of it would have to be, must be history.
So what was it like premiering it at the Toronto Film Festival after all of that?
It was incredible. My first film had been screened at Toronto Film Festival, but we were a very small, independent British movie. And whilst Belle had been made as an independent movie, British independent movie, we were brought by Fox Searchlight right before Toronto, which was great. And we weren't brought just for the US or just for the UK, we were brought for the world.
Wow,
so it meant that we had their might behind us by the time we came to Toronto, and it was quite a different experience having a big studio or a studio like Fox Searchlight behind you, who was so in love with the story and so much wanting to be part of this story and bringing this story to the world. So it was an incredible experience, of something like a 3-minute standing ovation more or less, and just the first time that we really felt love for the film from people who had not been involved with it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So there's an interesting dichotomy represented with her name.
Yes.
So there's Dido, which was what her British family called her.
Yes.
And then there's Belle, which was her mother's name.
Yes.
So why did you choose to title the film Belle?
Well, in the movie, you know, we don't ever see her mother. We only hear about her. And we're seeing this girl in this world which is completely white, apart from Mabel, the maid. And I wanted to honour her mother, Dido's mother. I wanted to honour her even though she could not be physically present in the movie. I wanted her to be spiritually present within our memories. And so as she was Maria Belle, and as she named her daughter after herself, I wanted to name the film after both of them and pay tribute to her mother.
Ah, very nice, very nice.
Yeah.
And so how did you connect with Gugu and Batara as the lead actress for the film?
Actually, it was a very easy process. The movie that I had talked to you about earlier, that was set in Germany, which I will shoot in 2015.
Oh, okay.
Where Hands Touch. Gugu had actually originally come to audition for. So she'd come in for a casting, and this young woman stepped into the room, and her presence, I was just completely blown away at that time. So I knew of Gugu. Quite some time passed, and she came over to America, and she was involved in TV series here and a couple of movies. She was on Broadway with Jude Law, playing Ophelia to Jude Law's Hamlet. And so time passed, and both my producer Damien and I knew of her, and eventually it was time to start casting. We met probably every biracial actress of the right age in the UK, and Gugu was one of those. But Gugu's smart. She's very, very smart. She understood what I wanted to do with this story, the kind of journey that I wanted to put this character on, which on the surface is very simple, but actually underneath is very complex. She understood that I wanted to take this character from girl to woman with a political awakening in there, that it needed to be a sweeping love story, as well as a story that made us feel the emotion of the impact of slavery, even though we never actually see a slave. Now, it was very much my wish that we didn't see slaves, but we actually had to feel, we were looking at the laws that supported slavery, and we had to feel the impact of slavery from that point of view. And that's because that was a really important reason, which was I wanted to prove that you could put a woman of colour front and centre of an Austen-esque piece of work, a traditional British period drama, and that it would work. Now, obviously, in the script that Damien had been working on previously, you know, which was a very different world, you know, Dido was running around with shells on her ankles, and John de Vigny has an affair with Elizabeth, and it
was a different story.
It was called Belle and Bette, and it was a very different movie. But and in that you did see slaves. You did see slaves, sort of interludes with slaves kind of floating on the water, and it was kind of a reminder that this is what happened to those over 100 slaves during the Zong case. But for me, I wanted to work from a much more psychological point of view, and really look at. Well, for me, it was important that if I was going to tell a movie that was Austen-esque and that looked at genteel society, that I also looked at the world that was
there and
funding that society and the economy of that society, and the trade that was sponsoring that society, and that was the slave trade. So, so it was very important for me to keep it Austen-esque, but also make sure that the impact of slavery hit.
And was it important that the actress be of mixed race that played the role?
Yes, it was very, very important that she be of mixed race. Being that we knew that her father was white and her mother was black, it was very, very important that she didn't look completely. When I say completely black, we come in all different shades, but it didn't look like both her mother and father were 100% black or 100% white. It was important that we could see that she was at the junction of race. She is at the junction of status. She is at the junction of all these different themes in the story, because the story is really about a woman who comes to a place where she has to combine all of these parts of herself, the child of a slave and the child of an aristocrat, the child of a black person and the child of a white person, a woman of color growing up in an aristocratic society, and she has to find a way to love all those parts of herself, bring them together and be okay with it. So it was very, very important that she looked the mixture that she absolutely is.
Represented.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so there's a scene that I thought was really powerful between Mabel, the servant in London, and Belle when she's combing her hair, and she's struggling to comb her hair, and Belle offers to show her how to comb her hair starting from the ends.
Yeah, Mabel offers to show Belle how to comb her hair.
Mabel offers to show Belle from the ends.
Yeah.
And so I believe that there was a significance there that you wanted to convey to the audience. Was there?
Yeah, there was. You know, I was thinking about growing up in a household of people that love you, but are trying to understand the right way to love you, the way you need to be loved, but people who don't look anything like you. What must that be like? And it brought me to a place where I was thinking about maternal legacy.
Okay.
And the things we take for granted, the simple things that we take for granted that our mother passes on to us.
Yes.
And so I had been thinking about cooking, and you know, oftentimes it's our mother that teaches us how to cook the food that comes from our community and from our culture. And I thought, well, Dido wouldn't cook for herself, so that's really not gonna work. And then I thought, hair, you know, what is something we do every single day, we have to deal with every single day, that's like our thing, a woman thing, and very much a woman of color thing, and it was hair. And I suddenly thought, you know, no products, you know, no shampoos, no tools, nothing. Everything geared towards, except for the comb, exactly. Everything geared towards a Caucasian woman, and with nobody there to teach you how to take care of your own hair. No one there that knows. No matter how much they love you, no one there that knows. And I was thinking about this, and again, this was part of me honoring her mother right the way through the story. So you never see this black woman, but she's there very much in the story, and we never forget her. She talks about her right the way through. And I thought, the other thing was that I desperately wanted to have another person of color in the movie, which is why I created Mabel to be in the movie. And I wanted to show, you know, in the way that I wanted to show that Elizabeth and Dido, Belle, have a sisterhood that comes under a lot of pressure, but they remain ultimately, essentially connected. I also wanted to show some connection between Belle and a person of color in the movie. And so this moment comes in, which I find, you know, for myself, you know, when I was putting it together, I found it very hard and sad but also uplifting at the same
Yeah, 'cause
time.
Belle does it with such affection.
Yes, with
Yeah.
such affection, and I wanted it to be that way. Now, this is part of 3 mirror scenes in actual fact. The first mirror scene is one in which Dido is actually harming herself. You know, she's very uncomfortable with herself.
Right, I
The
remember that.
final one is one where Dido's good with herself. She's happy, you see a small smile. She's coming to that place where she's okay with herself. And the middle scene is a transition. It's reflecting the transition that Dido is going through.
When they
and
reflect
this is
off the mirror.
when they reflect off the mirror, and Mabel is combing her hair, and you see Dido relax,
Yeah.
and she's okay with this being around this woman of color. She's relaxed in the kind of sisterhood that this maid offers her, and of course this maid says, "My mum taught me."
Yeah.
You see, and so this middle scene is representing a transition that Dido is going through with being okay with a part of herself that society has made her feel like is a burden.
Right. That's awesome. And in fact, what was interesting in the painting, Dido Elizabeth Belle is wearing a turban.
Yes.
So it gives you sort of maybe a hint that she didn't have anybody that knew how to comb her hair, and that's how they managed it
That's
in
probably
reality.
how they managed it. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So what was it like recreating 18th century England? And where did most of the filming take place?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a joy because I knew that I was doing something really traditional that all of you guys as an audience would have a shorthand to. You would all know this world. You've all seen Pride and Prejudice and
Right.
Sense and Sensibility and
Exactly.
this wonderful world. But B, I knew I was going to be doing something really different with it by putting this character in the center of it. So I loved it. You know, I constantly thought, you know, I always have a color chart for every movie that I work on, which because I think it creates a harmonious aesthetic on the screen. But everything I was working with was knowing that I was going to have this woman of a beautiful skin tone on the screen. So for me, I wanted to present to you a new idea of an English rose, you know, my idea of an English rose.
Nice.
So you'll see in the picture here, Belle is always sort of featured often around roses. She's in rosy colours. You know, her colour scheme is that of beautiful flowers. And you know, we built out the colour scheme of the her entire world really from there. So each family really has its own colour. So for the Ashford family, they have this kind of icy cold blue. Go figure. And for Belle, I wanted her to, and the Mansfield family, I really wanted that sense of it being regal and important and wealthy. So they have golds. You know, you'll see that. You know, in the world behind Dido here, it's gold. Their carriage is gold. Lord Mansfield's world is pretty gold as well, quite often. So it was great. We filmed mainly in. We filmed at English Heritage Houses in London.
Okay.
So we weren't able to film at the Real Kenwood House because it was being refurbished at the time.
Okay.
So we filmed in 2 or 3 houses that we then had to put together. I had to have
Make
a
it
little
look like
map
one.
where I said, this is where the staircase will be and this is where the dining room will be. And my wonderful, wonderful production designer was working with me to do that and created, again, the beautiful aesthetic that you see on screen. We shot a lot in London. We shot in central London where we had to shut, you know, whole streets off and really, I mean, very little of what you see is CGI. It's real stuff that you see there.
So it looks like.
We shot in the Isle of Man to do a lot of our exteriors, which is very green and lush and beautiful. And we also shot in Oxford, which is actually where Gugu, the lead actress, is from. So
that was exciting for
her. So it was like going home. And her art teacher actually walked by accidentally while we were filming and was like, is that woman in that outfit Gugu and Bata Raw? Because I used to teach her, so I had to kind of take him through all the barriers and get him through to her. So
Oh, that's awesome.
to speak to her,
Okay, so now I want to switch up a little bit and talk about some of the historical aspects of the film.
Yes.
So most of us in the U.S. are very aware of America's role in the slave trade.
Yes.
But maybe not as familiar with England. And since England emancipated, or I should say abolished slavery.
Yes.
Decades before the U.S.
Yes.
What can you tell us more about that history of the slave trade and And specifically the song Massacre, that's sort of the critical judgment that happens.
Sure.
And is the beginning of the end of British, I guess, slave trade in British Empire.
So, you know, some of you may know this, but I know even a lot of English people don't know this, British people don't know this, which is that Britain was the middleman when it came to the slave trade. And whenever I'm speaking, you know, I often say we, and then I have to define which we, because I'm a bit schizophrenic, because I'm black and I'm British. So for this moment, I'm British.
You're British, okay, got it.
So what we would do is we were the suppliers. We were very big in shipping at this point, and we had what you would call the shipping triangle, whereby we would sell from England to Africa, and then to the Caribbean or the Americas, and then back again. And no leg of that journey should be empty. We should always have goods which we could trade. And then, you know, drop the goods off, pick up new goods, and go somewhere else. So here's how it worked. We would take whatever goods that Britain had to offer, we would load them on the ship, sail to Africa, exchange those goods with money as well for slaves, load up the slaves, then off to the Caribbean or the Americas, unload the slaves, pick up cotton, spices, whatever we could get, and then bring it back and sell it in Britain. So that's what we did. Now, slavery was all a bit too vulgar to have on British shores. It was all a bit, it wasn't, you know, didn't work for the genteel society. So it was all you guys that had it over this side of the Atlantic. And how so when I say I wanted to look at the economy that was holding up this genteel society that you see on Pride and Prejudice and these other period dramas that come before, because Dido was a little bit earlier actually than Austen's time. This is the trade, this is the shipping trade. And what I should also tell you is that the world that you come into with Belle is on the cusp of change. So whereas the marriages that were the kind of marriages of the time were based on status. You married so that your family status could grow. What was happening now was the love marriage was coming in slowly. It was starting to pierce society. It was becoming not acceptable, but it was on its way to becoming acceptable. And new money was coming in. And this new money would be a farmer, for instance, who might gain enough money to buy a ship. And then he would start on this triangle that we talk about. So he would also be involved in the slave trade. And then suddenly he's making a lot of money from this. Suddenly his children are the child of a wealthy man. Suddenly they might be of interest to someone of old money, exactly, who might want to marry them. So there was a fear of this. And Lord Mansfield is very representative of that cusp of change that we're on. He's got one foot in the now, and the kind of the status quo, and rules must be stuck to. No, let's not break up the chaos. Let's not encourage chaos or break up the rules. But then he is conflicted because he has this other foot very firmly in being a progressive man in tomorrow, being a man ahead of his time. And those two areas are conflicting inside him. There could be 10 movies made about this incredible man who chose to raise Dido the way that he did. So you've got all of that coming in. Now, the Zong case comes into the story because many people were trying to get into the shipping trade at this time. And the man who comes to be the captain of the ship that sails on this terrible journey is actually a doctor. And this is his first time actually captaining a ship. And he gets on the ship and doesn't quite know what he's doing, and it's a protracted journey. The journey is longer than it should be, so they've packed the slaves in the disgusting way we know that they would, you know, one on top of each other. They said that you could smell a slave ship a mile downwind of it because it was so disgusting and full of disease. And so you can imagine when this journey becomes even longer because he's missing all the points where he should be stopping and getting off. These slaves are getting more sick and more sick and more sick. And what happens is he decides at a certain point that he is going to order his crew to jettison these slaves from the ship because he realizes he will get more money from
From
the
the
insurance
insurance.
than he will on the open market
Right.
for them. Now, you could do that. You could jettison your cargo. You could jettison, whatever it was you were carrying, if you could prove that it was endangering your ship.
Right.
So if you could prove that those slaves were so sick that they were making the crew sick, if you could prove there wasn't enough water, if you could prove there wasn't enough food, if you could prove that there was, I don't know, the ship was tipping and there had too much weight on it and you had to jettison so that you had enough time to get to land, whatever. What is clear, what we know, and what I found out during my side of the research was that they did in fact pass these 8 ports where they could have stopped and got water. So this ridiculous argument that they didn't have enough water was in fact a lie. And so therein was the Zong case. Now, Lord Mansfield was caught between his peers, who were the people who financially benefited from the slave trade, and of course his own moral values, and even more so his love for his child. If he pronounced in a way that would confirm value to his child, he was actually sticking a knife into the lifeblood of the economy of England and his peers. But if he found for his peers, what would he be saying about Dido and who she is and what she means to him? What we know about Lord Mansfield previously is that he had ruled on a case called the Somerset case, in which an American comes to England with a slave, and the slave, once on English soil, says, I'm on England now, I'm not a slave, you can't make me a slave. And here the question, just as the question in the Zong kind of centered on marine insurance law, the question here really centered on, when you're on English soil, can American law prevail? And Lord Mansfield says, no, it can't. It can't prevail, and therefore the slave is free, and he frees the slave. So he had already kind of ruled previously in a way that would direct us towards the fact that he was ahead of his time.
Yeah.
He was a man of great good moral judgment and value, but of course we still could not know what he might rule on the Zong case.
Okay, very, very interesting. So, all right, so now we want to take a look at an argument scene between the cousins. Okay. So let's take a look at it first, and then I'll ask you a question.
Okay.
So when I saw that scene, I kept thinking she was going to say, "You're black," like they did in the beginning of the movie, but she doesn't. She says illegitimate, and I'm wondering, was that in the original script, or did you try out different responses during filming to find what was authentic? You knew?
No. I mean, I always knew I was never going to take you there, because what I wanted to do was create a sistership, as I say, a sisterhood. And however, that sistership was going to have to address the issues of race and position and status at some point. It was always going to have to do that. But I knew if I took you there, you would never come back from it with Elizabeth. You would never. She would never be in your hearts again, and also it would destroy everything that I had done previously in showing you that look how 2 women of different races can love each other. So I was never going to take you there. But what I also wanted to do, which is something I had always, there are many parallels that I had wanted to strike with this film. One is the parallel of gender, the woman's place, and the woman being owned by her husband versus the slave being owned, so the idea of ownership. And the other parallel that I really wanted to look at was this idea that illegitimacy could be, in some circumstances, as much of a burden as being a woman of colour.
And it was in that time for people that were illegitimate.
Exactly. And you could, right up until the 60s, I mean, people have talked to me about being illegitimate or and the burden that it kind of put on them. And so I wanted everybody to understand this is complex, this is not simple. There was no race issues without class issues, without gender issues, without you know, all of this stuff that was overlapping the whole time. And for a woman, again, at the junction of where I've placed her, at the junction of all these different paths, and as she says, I find no place I can find where I belong, then I wanted to show you the complexity of what this is. I mean, what I did have a ball doing is putting together the dialogue of two girls arguing in the 18th century. And what you don't see in that clip is what follows is what I call a South London cuss. Because, you know, Belle does put Bet right in no uncertain terms. And, you know, I could never have put together that scene without that South London part of me coming into the cuss. And, you know, in many screenings that I've been to, it gets a huge round of applause. And when I'm sitting in the screening, I'm there. I'm clapping with her, even though I put those words in her mouth because I still feel it at that moment when she is finding her own and saying, no, you will not demean me. I will not allow you to demean me. So, yes, I mean, in so many ways, the language of the film is so bold. You know, you get the black at the beginning.
Very direct, too.
Very direct. That's something that I experienced in my life with my first husband. Will not mind me saying that his mother, when she first met me, I was very young, in my early 20s, said, oh, she's quite pretty, but she's very black. You know, but she's black, and 10 years on, it's a nice dress on her, but she's black. You know, she's black, and you know, Miranda Richardson's character is very much based on that experience and that person, and so so the language is very bold, but I wanted to play with the boldness of the language versus not. You know, because the whole scene starts so gently with this piano playing and this loving sisterly conversation, and then goes into this horrible, ugly place. And I wanted to draw you in to the dialogue I'd created there, and draw you into and make you think, oh, now it's going to be horrible and disgusting. But she would never do that to her sister, even in this situation.
When she said it, it felt so much more authentic than what I was expecting to hear. I was like, that wouldn't work because they love each other.
They love each other.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Okay, so from what I read, some of the history about Dido Belle Elizabeth on Wikipedia and BBC sites, and so I learned that Belle's existence was discovered by the papers, the painting, and then they discovered more about her life through the papers of the Kenwood House. And I was wondering, were there any writings in Belle's hand that were found that could speak to her voice and give you help?
I pray that there will be one day. Okay. I pray that there will be something. There was a gentleman named Hutchinson who came over from America, and he came over to talk to Lord Mansfield about the Zong case and wanting to really lobby Lord Mansfield to find against the insurers, find for the ship owners. In other words, to lobby Lord Mansfield to find that it was okay for you to drown your slaves because this was going to have such an impact on slavery. And now he writes in his diary, and I'm totally paraphrasing here, but it's easy to find online.
Okay.
Easy to find on Google. That he comes to the house and he sits down and he has a formal dinner with the family, and after dinner this negress comes out. As you described her. You know, but she has the entire family wrapped around her little finger essentially, and she's walking arm in arm around the gardens, and you know they're treating her, you know, like one of them. And he's horrified by this. He's absolutely horrified by this. And what he says is, I did want to bring up the Zong with Lord Mansfield, but I didn't think that was quite the right time. In other words, he knew that they clearly loved this girl, and that, you know, bringing up issues of black people at that particular point and encouraging him to say that it would be okay to massacre them, it was probably not the right time. So virtually, it's elements like that. It's papers that we can find. For instance, we know where she married John de Vigny. So she married him in St. George's Church in Hanover Square. We know that she christened all of her children in the same church. So that kind of paperwork, I was able to look at the two wills that Lord Mansfield left Dido Belle money in, and to discover also that it, not even though, you know, in the film we portray it that he isn't sure if he can, he does, but also that his sister, Lady Mary, played by Penelope Wilton, also leaves her money. And what that expressed to me, what that did, it helped to cement for me the idea that they loved her.
Yeah, they loved her.
They loved this girl. And, you know, she had to teach them the right way to love her, as I've said before, but they loved this girl. So it was really finding all of this information for the story that I wanted to tell. Because, look, there have been plays on Dido Belle before. There have been short movies of Dido Belle before. You know, as I say, there was this earlier version, and it was about me as a director finding my vision of the story I wanted to tell. And so it was, I can only do that through piecing together my own history and deciding then how it should all be sewn together. So, but no diaries. But there's still time. You never know.
You never know.
You never know.
Yes, that's how life is. So I think we're going to stop now and take some Q&A from the audience. Does anybody have, and there's a mic, I guess, in the center here. Anybody have any questions? Okay, I'll ask more a question while people come to the mic.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Actually, so the next one is a scene. We'd like to cue this scene where she's actually having a conversation with John Devinier about her status in life.
Yeah,
yes, a really great scene.
I love her look.
Yeah,
in that
I love
moment,
her look.
The way she looks at him. Yeah, absolutely. It's a complex scene, that one.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you about. Could you elaborate on sort of, you know, her thoughts at that time? Because she's recognizing, you know, this interesting position she's in society where she doesn't have to marry for money and position.
Yeah. Well, this is all part of her awakening, really, all part of her political awakening, all part of her understanding of who she is as a woman and a woman of colour and where she fits. Like I say, I always wanted to strike that parallel of ownership between this person of colour being owned and the woman being owned. And I was exploring this in my own mind, as I do one day, as I do, and one day, and I was sitting at my desk and, you know, putting together the story that I wanted to tell, and I wanted to express the pressure of society at that time.
Yes.
I mean, there was so much pressure came from society, and as I say at the beginning of the movie via Lord Mansfield, society has a habit of casting out even one of its own when it has the opportunity. It was so easy to kind of be cast out and kind of be blacklisted and be turned out from society, and I was kind of thinking about this fortunate position of this character and how she's wealthy and a woman of colour at the same time, and yet she's still desperate to belong. She's still desperate to be like the other girls who have to marry, and she's still desperate for society's endorsement, which says she should not only marry but marry an equal or higher, which is a man of consequence. And so she's working out all these arguments in her head that I wanted to offer to you as an audience. And on the one hand, she recognises that she's in this very strong position. Yes, she is this woman who is both free as a female and as a slave. A female because she has money, and a slave because she's been taken into a family that has allowed her not to be a slave. And decided to honour the side of her bloodline that did not emanate from slavery. But then on the other hand, wanting to belong, she's talking about this pressure of, but who will society think I am if I don't marry a man of consequence? And then she's realising also the ridiculousness of this pressure, because it would be like a free man begging, you know, a free Negro begging to have a master.
Yeah.
You know, exactly that.
Exactly
and
that.
you know, in the end, when you're working, the characters speak to you and they come to you with their own story. And, you know, there are times where I would come out with stuff and I go, oh, that was clever. Oh, I like that. And that was one of those moments where, you know, so many of what comes out in this story is, you know, comes directly from my own family and my own, you know, love connections in life, like, you know, what is right can never be impossible was something my dad used to say very regularly. Or, you know, when her blood father says to her biological father says, you will not understand this in this moment, but know that you are loved. You know, that was something my father used to say to me when I was very, very small, when he was trying to give me the steel to go out into the world. And even Lady Mary's line of, you know, Elizabeth, wait for no man, was a line from my big sister. She was 6 years older than me, and she used to try to be the grown-up woman. And so she used to say to me, you know, you should never wait for any man. I'd be 10 years old and she'd say this. But these particular lines were really lines that for me just came from being in the shoes of the character.
Awesome.
And being in the story. Yeah.
Okay, so we see a few people in line. So yes, we'd like to take a question.
Hi, Alma. My name's Lauren.
Hi, Lauren.
Thank you so much for coming today. I had the chance to see the film yesterday, and it was beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you for making it.
Thank you.
I have a quick question for you. My question is, what made you decide to make the film more lighthearted and about romance versus a darker film that stresses the turmoil of slavery?
Yeah. Well, Lauren, I mean, for me, I definitely wanted to create this Austen-esque drama that I talked about earlier and challenge myself to be able to make a film in that way, show that a woman of colour could do it, could be behind the camera and do it, but also that a woman of colour could be in front of the camera and appeal to everybody, appeal universally. Now, as we know, Austen never talked about slavery, and if I had gone that route of making something much harder, I'd have been coming away from my idea of creating an Austen-esque, that working in that Austen-esque sub-genre of movie making. And so for me, I always knew that I was going to tell this more gentle story where you wouldn't actually see slaves, but as I explained earlier, you would feel the impact of the horror of what was happening to them. And I also think sometimes that you can communicate to an audience more easily when the horror is emotional and psychological, but is not kind of so explicit on the screen. And I like to think that I don't come to movie making with a message, but I come to ask questions and to try and motivate you as a society to have those conversations and ask those questions. And I think what a costume drama like this does is inspire conversation and dialogue, because not everybody wants to read the newspaper or wants to kind of be hit over the head with a message or a political kind of stance in that way. But I think when it comes to you in this gentle form, you naturally respond to it as opposed to feeling like you're being forced to respond to it. And so I wanted to challenge myself and see if I could really tell what is essentially still a tough story, but within the context of a love story and self-awakening and a journey towards self-love, and not be explicit with violence.
Thank you. Yeah, congratulations for seeing your vision through. It's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hi, Amma. My name's Jana.
Hi, Jana.
Like I said, I actually saw this at TIFF and got to witness and be a part of the standing ovation. So thank you for coming to Google.
Thank you.
So my question, I'm really interested in Black protagonists, and I read a lot of articles more recently about Black Renaissance in film. And Belle is a part of the films that are named, including 12 Years a Slave, The Butler, Django even. Some of the argument, people are arguing that this is a Black Renaissance, whereas I read other articles that kind of discredit this and say all of these films, or most of them, focus on Blacks, but in a space of servitude or not modern Blacks. It's there's a disparity, and so I want to know your thoughts. Belle, I think, is different because she's not, it's a historic piece, but she's not in a position of servitude necessarily. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on the larger argument of this presence of Blacks on screen, but also them being in the past and not current.
Sure. Well, I do like to think that Belle kind of steps away, outside of that argument to a certain extent. So I do agree with you there. But I do think that as filmmakers, we and particularly as filmmakers of colour or filmmakers that are putting stories about people of colour on screen, we kind of have to have the freedom within a certain, to a certain extent, to choose the stories that touch us, that we want to tell. Now, certainly I can say that as a British filmmaker of colour, we've been starved of those opportunities to really tell stories about things that matter to us. So the first thing we're going to do when we get those opportunities is kind of go to the heart of stuff that matters, and who we are today, and what inspires us, what motivates us, to move forward today, I mean, I think has so much to do with our history. So why not, as filmmakers, be able to look at that history? Now, you know, I know Steve McQueen has made other movies aside from 12 Years a Slave, and I certainly have made other movies aside from you know, this movie Belle, and I intend to go on and make movies of all kinds. In fact, the next movie I'm going to make is for Warner Brothers. It's called Unforgettable. It's very much rooted in today. It has a double female lead and is very much about, again, the woman's experience, looking at many of the themes of Belle, but much more in a modern day context. And I have no doubt that many of the filmmakers whose films we've talked about, you know, The Butler, I mean, you know, what was precious if it wasn't today? And though, you know, the lead character in that movie had a very, very difficult time, she wasn't in servitude. But we have to be allowed, otherwise we're restricting, you know, us restricting ourselves as people of colour is no different to other people from other races restricting us. You know, just because it comes from us, from the inside, it doesn't make it any better or any more right or any more worthy. What we have to be allowed to do is, A, tell our stories. There have to be more of us, so that there is a variety of those stories. Sure, if you've only got 5 or 6 of us, you're always going to be able to sow comparisons between our movies. When you have 50 of us, then you're going to be able to, I mean, what was Spike Lee doing? I mean, what has Spike Lee been doing for all these years? He hasn't been telling stories of people of colour in servitude. Can we, you know, we don't have to go that far back to illuminate these stories. So the arguments for me are unfair, unwarranted, and I think they're restrictive, and they restrict creativity, to be honest with you. We have to be free. I didn't tell Belle without knowing that I had a responsibility, and I can tell you that I took that responsibility very, very seriously, and that is why, despite the fact that I had a lot of worries and concerns that she was too feisty and, you know, and her development was kind of too upfront, for me, I was not going to come to a story. I was not going to put a character on screen unless she was that, because, you know, they were worried that she wouldn't be likable, and I said, you know, what's not going to be likable is a weak wallflower woman of colour put on the screen at this particular time. And so I took that responsibility seriously. And as filmmakers of colour, we know how to do that. But we also have to be allowed to be creative, I think.
Well, thank you for inspiring the next generation of filmmakers of
Thank
color.
you so much. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank
you.
Oh,
yes,
I see
one more. Sure.
Hi, Emma. My name is Phineas.
Hi.
And I just wanted to ask if you had any pieces or scenes that you had to take out that, you know, you want us to know. I guess it would be interesting to kind of hear about those too.
Well, early on from the script, I had written a scene. This is not a very serious scene, but it's just a scene I would have loved to have shot, where I had written one of the very typical ballroom scenes that you get, the quintessential ballroom scene in the period drama, and you know, again, I'd never seen a woman of colour in that context, so I really wanted to shoot the typical dance, 18th century line dance scene that you get. And it was a very big scene, and, you know, I was going to be shooting it from the point of view of somebody watching from above, and it was just so big and expensive that we had to take that scene out. I did create a scene at the very beginning of the movie where you see the painter putting together a sketch of the girls. It's actually Elizabeth's face. What you see is the kind of quintessential English girl coming to the fore, kind of emerging in the painting. But what you don't necessarily know is actually the end of the painting is going to be something very different, far more powerful and strong. We had to take that out because it was long. It was a sort of intercut kind of opening credit scene, but intercutting that with Captain Sir John Lindsay arriving to collect the little Belle, that was a little bit long-winded, so we took that out. Essentially, I was able to keep the essence of the movie that I wanted. So while we sliced out lines, we didn't take out too many full scenes that I thought were really important, thankfully. I'm a control freak, and I've been lucky enough in both movies that I've made to be able to get what I want up there on screen. And, you know, it won't always be like that. I know that. Employers, I know that. But for now, this is how it has been. And I essentially, you know, I got the I got what I wanted up there on screen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Amma.
It's been such a pleasure.
Yes, thank you for sharing the film and
Thank
your perspective
you.
with us. This was great, and we want to congratulate you on the success of your sophomore project.
Thank you.
And we hope you come with your next project.
Thank you so
Okay,
much.
thank
It's
you.
really good to talk to you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.